almost forgot about the intro. It's been so long.
Hey, but I mean, it was the first time we've done it without stumbling over
That's
something
true.
in a while.
So, hello and
Hi.
welcome back. It has been
6 weeks?
Has it been that long?
Probably.
Oh wow! So yeah, it's been a little while since we've recorded. It's been a very busy month. We had a graduation,
An 18th birthday.
Trips,
New jobs.
Yeah, so this past month has just been slammed, and we could not eke out a minute to not only go to the movies, we couldn't eke out a minute to talk about the one movie we had seen that we still need to do a review for.
Right, which is not this review.
No, yeah, we will get to that, we promise. But so sorry for our long absence. To the loyal listeners, we welcome you back, and yeah, how you doing there, sweetheart?
Okay. See if I can remember how to speak into the phone without losing my train of thought. I mean, we are doing this at 10:45 on a Saturday night after a work week.
That is true. So it's been
a work week and a week of tech week for a show we're
also behind. Yeah, we're also working behind the scenes on. So yeah, we have been slammed. But most of it good.
Right.
Well, it's all been good stuff that's been happening, but
don't think we've been going to the movies without you. This has been our first date night.
Yeah. This has been a while in the making. So we were finally able to get away and spend some time together and go to a movie, and now we're back doing this.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about, since we're rebooting our show. Let's talk about the reboot of franchise properties.
Which we may have talked about before, but we don't remember.
So that's far enough back that, it's far enough.
So, yeah.
And I know we've talked specifically about reboots for, franchises, but not necessarily a situation like this where you have a franchise, it goes away, and then it comes back decades later.
Yeah.
So, okay, so...
Or I think there's a lot... There's more kind of that goes into it when you're rebooting an entire franchise than just kind of one property. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Here's the question for you.
Okay.
Because probably the most famous one would be Star Wars.
Yeah.
Do you really believe that George Lucas had all 9 movies thought up and written before he started making Star Wars?
Oh, hell no. Oh, hell no. I don't believe
he had the second one written when he started the first one, because then if he did, he's got some incestuous thoughts that he needs to probably talk to his therapist about.
I don't believe... I believe him when he said that he kind of knew the backstory of things, and the idea that he knew vaguely kind of what he wanted to do, and then just kind of chopped them up because it was one of those things where, especially back then, franchises weren't a huge thing, and it's easy to forget now, but Star Wars was such a risky property at the time.
Right, there wasn't, there were franchises like James Bond, or, Sam Spade.
Yeah.
But nothing sci-fi, really, right?
Those are, you're right, but those are kind of different in that, at least to me, and I don't know if anyone else has this definition, the Bond movies are a franchise, but they're different from, say, the Star Wars films, because they're not, at least not until these last couple Abominations, they were never a continuing story.
True.
That each one was a self-contained adventure.
I guess you've got to give us your idea of a franchise, because for me, a franchise is a character and a property.
Okay.
Like this idea of a spy for England traveling around the world, seducing women, catching the bad guy, a really odd bad guy usually. I think it's enough of a franchise in and of itself that it's spawned many parodies.
Yeah, you're right.
So I would call that a franchise for sure.
Okay.
What about like your
But that's one that has kind of always self-rebooted. Almost every time it got a new Bond, it kind of rejiggered everything a little bit.
Okay, so that's a good question. Like, I think, let's come back to Bond. Let's continue talking about Star Wars.
Okay.
Okay, so, we have the 70s and 80s, right?
Yeah.
70s and 80s with the original Star Wars. Did you watch them as a kid?
Oh yeah. Oh, I was all about Star Wars when I was a kid. The very first movie I saw in the theater was Return of the Jedi.
Okay.
So yeah, I was hardcore Star Wars.
Okay, so and then you kind of like, okay, so you were big into Star Wars as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Then by the time the prequels came out, where did you stand?
Like, how do you mean? Like, what did I?
Were you a big Star Wars fan? Did you go watch them?
I watched them. I think my enthusiasm for Star Wars had kind of worn off.
Right.
And then I started in with Star Wars fatigue, where you just you got tired of the movies not being great, and then what made it worse is you got tired of the fans being awful.
Okay.
And so yeah, so I was kind of like most people. I thought, and still do think, that while the prequels were not as bad as people made them out to be, they certainly weren't good.
Right, and they didn't live up to the original.
No.
Okay, now what about episodes 6 through 9? Or 7, 8, 9?
The Disney trilogy?
Yes.
I thought the first one was just a retread of the original.
Okay.
Okay. Fair enough. Introducing new characters. I actually liked The Last Jedi. I know that I am in the minority in that. Because I thought they actually tried to do something interesting with it.
Mm-hmm.
And then The Rise of Skywalker, I hate agreeing with the neckbeards, but it was just trash.
See, I liked parts of The Rise of Skywalker. I did not like the retconning they did for certain things. And I did not like that they bowed and kowtowed to the fanboys.
Mm-hmm.
And like reduced the diversity of the show.
Yeah.
Of the movie.
Or anything interesting that The Last Jedi set up, they responded so negatively to the backlash from it that the film made no sense.
Right. So here's a question for you. In regards to a situation like a beloved franchise, how much does the writer owe to the audience?
I don't know. That's a hell of a question. That is a hell of a question.
And it's one that I think as a writer you would probably have strong feelings about, because do you owe more to your characters and material than you do your audience? Because I think it's safe to say that there were several things that happened in Rise of the Skywalker that were not fair to the characters that they had set up.
No, you're absolutely right.
So...
oh man, that is such a great question. That is a really good question. And it's so hard to kind of articulate, so I'm going to do the very best I can. I think when working with a long-standing series,
okay,
what you owe to the fans is to be true to the thematic underpinnings and the core elements of that franchise. But that is kind of it. The rest, you need to tell your story and hope that the audience comes like, okay, let me give you, let me see if I can articulate this a little bit better with examples.
Okay.
So I'll take the polar opposite of the Star Wars franchise and talk about the Star Trek franchise.
I was literally just going to ask you about that.
Is that why most Star Trek shows work, and there are ones that don't. Discovery doesn't work.
For you.
For me. That's a good point. What you owe to the audience is to be respectful of the core elements of it. The idea of exploration, the idea of it being both fun but also having something to say
about social society,
or about anything. Like having something, it doesn't necessarily always have to be about social issues, though it normally is. It could be just have something to say.
Right. I think when you're talking about Star Trek too, staying loyal to the idea of the way that we got the ideal Earth society was by challenging our societal expectations of being inclusive and diverse.
Yes.
And when you have people complain about there being a non-binary character on the show, or there being a gay couple on the show, or there being, like when you have people complaining about things like that, they're really not staying true to the basic ideal of Star Trek, which was that acceptance.
Yeah. Well, like, okay, again, going a little deeper into the metaphor or the example, when it aired, people hated Deep Space Nine because it's dark, it goes against everything Trek is, and all, It's like, no, it didn't. It was true to that, but one of its underlying thematic elements was the concept that yes, Earth has a perfect society, but that doesn't mean that once you achieve that, you get to slack off and, all the bad things have gone away. They're still there.
Right.
And they explored that. They were still true to the thematic underpinnings of the franchise, but they did it in a different way. And people hated it at the time, but a lot of people have come around to it in recent years.
And what I think too, I would say you misspoke with saying perfect society. I would say an idealistic society.
Yes.
Because it embraces the idea that humans are still humans and have to learn and change and adapt and grow.
Yeah. So I would say that I think that's the best way I can answer your question. I think you have a responsibility to stay true to the core elements, the things that make the character or the situation or the world work. And from there, the changes you make, the things that you do, that's your obligation to the character, and to see if the audience goes with it. Okay, like another example, and again, this is my opinion, because I know a lot of people really liked it. One of the things I did not like about the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movies was it took away a lot of the everyman appeal of the character. Everything was a dark conspiracy. Everything was destined to happen.
Yeah.
And one of the core underpinnings of the Spider-Man character, why he's been so relatable for so long, is he's an everyman. He's one guy who had an accident happen to him, and he's trying to make the best of it.
Right.
And when you tinker with that, it undermines the character.
Okay. So let's talk about another franchise that you kind of hit on a little bit.
Okay.
Star Trek.
All right.
So you came to Star Trek in middle school?
Middle school, yeah.
And you started with the next...
I came in at about the middle to tail end of the Next Generation.
Right.
And then got caught up via reruns.
Okay. So, when did you go back and watch the original series?
kind of sporadically in between. You know, I never actually sat down. And of course, you have to understand, younger viewers. This is back before
it was the Stone Age.
Yeah, I mean, this is before you had like easy access to every episode. You know, so I would catch episodes occasionally on rerun, or I would rent a couple from Blockbuster.
Right.
So I've kind of just seen that one. I've seen just kind of bits and pieces of, honestly.
Okay. And then you stayed through Deep Space Nine,
through Voyager. Watched a little bit of Enterprise, which didn't. That was another one that didn't work for me.
So interestingly, that franchise had 3 separate reboots in the last few years.
Yes.
So Discovery is on what, season 7 now?
No, I think it's on 3 or 4. I think,
okay.
And it just wrapped up.
And Lower Decks.
Yeah, which is getting ready to wrap up after season 5.
Actually, there were 4, weren't there? Because there was Lower Decks, then there was Prodigy.
Mm-hmm. And then there's Picard.
Oh, and Strange New Worlds. So 5 reboots in the last.
Yeah.
So, and that's largely because of streaming services.
Yeah, needing content.
Right. So, did you feel like those reboots stayed true to the original franchise?
I think most of them, yes.
Okay.
I'm not a fan of Discovery.
Right.
Because I felt like I just couldn't get into it. And it would be a whole other thing to go into all the reasons I couldn't get into it.
Okay.
But I think suffice to say, for me, it couldn't tell, at least from the early seasons, if it was trying to be a prequel to the original series or a prequel to the J.J. Abrams show. And it...
Right, I had a hard time with that, following that.
Yeah, and as such, it tried to exist, like, trying to bridge those two aesthetics, and it didn't work. And I'm sorry, there are certain times, I try not to be too much of a fanboy, but certain continuity things just bugged me, you know. So, but most of all, I couldn't get into the story or the characters.
Okay, and then you had Lower Decks, which is the animated,
which I love.
Right.
Because I think it's something that they've never done before, done a straight-up comedy show.
Now, there was an episode, was it Voyager? What was Lower Decks an episode? Was it Next Generation?
What do you tell? Oh, they had an episode of The Next Generation called Lower Decks.
Right, which was about the people...
The ensigns.
Right, who weren't like the main people on the bridge.
It had no connection to the animated series.
No, but I feel like it must have inspired it.
Definitely, yeah, definitely.
Okay, so then you have like the characters are totally different, like totally new on that. And then Prodigy. Now I haven't seen any of Prodigy.
Prodigy is more. It's kind of Avatar: The Last Airbender for Star Trek.
Okay.
And it's good. I actually really enjoy it. It's just. It is definitely, again, it's something, they did something different and made one that was specifically for kids.
Now, is it kind of like take place in Starfleet Academy?
No, it's actually like out in the middle of space with the, where these like slave kids find a Starfleet ship and use it to escape.
Okay.
And they're on the run from the evil emperor who wants the ship back, and they have the holographic Janeway helping them.
Okay. But like you said, that one's wrapping up. Then there was Picard, which did 3 seasons?
3 seasons.
Yeah. But I think it was only ever meant to do 3 seasons, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It was like a contained unit.
Yeah.
And that was a continuation, of course, Jean-Luc Picard's story.
Yep.
Contained a lot of the next-gen actors.
The last season had all of them.
Okay. And then probably I would say, but like I said, I haven't seen most of the new reboots. I would say probably close to the top of my list of the series in general is Strange New Worlds.
Yeah, it would definitely be top of mind with the reboots.
Well, I mean overall.
Oh, wow. I don't know where it would fall overall.
I love what they've done with Captain Pike, even though, like, we know what's going to happen to him.
Mm-hmm.
But his story is still enticing and rich.
Yep.
I mean, I think that they had excellent casting.
I think they learned from Discovery's failings and made it an ensemble show and didn't try to focus everything on.
Yes, that's part of the problem with Discovery, is that it's mainly about
Burnham.
Yes. And yes, Strange New Worlds very much is an ensemble show.
Yeah, and it, like I say, it has the same tone of, here's a serious episode, oh, here's a funny episode.
Right.
You know, here's a really serious one, and it's a musical.
The musical episode was brilliant.
I know, I love that.
Yes. So, yeah, I think, like, that's definitely up there for me. I hate that the seasons only have, like, 6 episodes each of them. Like, please give me more.
Yeah.
But I have to say, it's like watching a movie for every episode. Like, the production quality is insane.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, so now back to non-science fiction franchises. Let's talk James Bond for a moment.
Okay.
You said it's basically a reboot every time they get a new actor.
And I think I was wrong.
Okay.
I thought about that, and I think that was true once Timothy Dalton took up the role. But like through Sean Connery and George Lazenby and Roger Moore, they were kind of a continual. They had the same Moneypenny, they had the same M.
Yeah.
You know, Q was the same all the way through till he passed away.
Right.
You know,
did John Cleese take over that?
He did in one James Bond movie, the last Pierce Brosnan one, and then they got rid of him when they rebooted with Daniel Craig.
Right. Okay. Now I know a lot of people loved the Daniel Craig James Bond. I love Daniel Craig. I love Daniel Craig as, what's his name? The detective.
Benoit Blanc.
Yeah, I love Benoit Blanc. I think he's done a lot of great work. I hate him as James Bond. And I love James Bond. I watched the movies growing up with my dad. I loved Sean Connery, was probably my favorite. But, you know, I had a soft spot for Pierce Brosnan, too. Because, you know, I'm a 90s kid. So he was those were the ones I saw on the big screen. So, yeah, I definitely love James Bond, and when it got to what they did with the Daniel Craig, I thought he could have been a good Bond. I really did. And then they just made him so morose. I'm sorry, James Bond is not supposed to fall in love. Like, to me, that was not true to the source material. Like, that just took what is supposed to be a popcorn spy movie and turned it into Batman Begins, and I didn't want that. So, yeah, that's just my opinion.
That's fair.
Okay.
That's
now,
fair.
you did like a couple of them.
I thought Casino Royale and Skyfall were genuinely great movies.
Okay.
I thought they were different. I thought they were refreshing. I thought they were what the character needed at that moment in history. But Quantum of Solace wasn't terrible. It was just forgettable. And the last two, Spectre and No Time to Die, they were awful.
Oh,
just
the worst.
Pure awful.
Absolutely awful.
This is how I'll tell you how bad they were, and this kind of answers your question earlier about The Last Jedi. Those two movies, No Time to Die and The Last Jedi, were so bad I didn't buy them on DVD.
Wait. mean Rise of Skywalker?
Rise of Skywalker. I'm sorry. Yes,
right. Okay.
They were so bad. I don't own them because I cannot.
I refuse to watch No Time to Die again.
Yeah, me too. Like I cannot think of a reason I would ever want to watch that movie again.
Yeah. Nope. I hated it. Now here's a question: since they literally killed James Bond in the last one, are they going to reboot again? Do you think?
I think they will eventually. Because if there's one thing that modern Hollywood has taught us, it's no franchise can stay dead.
Now, my other question is, don't you think Idris Elba could have been just as good as Daniel Craig?
I think so.
I wanted Idris Elba. That was the prime time for him would have been when Daniel Craig took over, and he would have been an excellent James Bond. We need a James Bond of color. Thank you very much. That is the end of my sub-speech. Now, let's talk a franchise that I know you enjoyed the reboots of.
Okay.
Rocky. Because 4th of July is coming up pretty soon.
Yeah.
And our annual tradition...
That's true, yeah, it is. Yeah.
Our annual tradition is to spend the day inside watching as many Rocky movies as we can. So...
I guess the problem I have is in terminology. 'Cause I don't consider the Creed films a reboot.
But how would they not be?
Because they're a continuation of the same story. They're not going back and saying, his name isn't Rocky. And they're doing Rocky again.
Okay,
it's
but then...
building off of the story that was already told.
Then none of these are reboots. Because they're all continuations.
Oh, well, I guess that is, yeah, okay. I don't know. That one, the Creed ones, I just don't think of as reboots.
Here's my thing. If you have a franchise that the last movie was in 1990, and then you have another one 20 years later, that is a reboot. That is rebooting the franchise. It's not a reboot of the movie, as in like...
Oh, it's rebooting the franchise.
It's rebooting the franchise.
Okay.
Okay? And that is what they did.
All right. Okay. In that terminology, yes, I agree.
Okay. So
that definition I can agree with.
Now, what successes did they do? Like, what did they do right when doing that?
Everything.
Okay, but
like I think what they did right is what any good franchise or any good reboot does. You had a fresh take on it from a new perspective that keeps the elements of the story, like for the Rockies, the underdog, the proving yourself, the fights being the metaphors for the fight of life,
right,
kind of thing, and told it with good characters.
Okay.
So that is what I think is, and again, that's what makes a good reboot. It's just what makes a good movie.
So, as far as staying true to the source material, one of the things that I loved about the Creed movies is that Rocky stayed so in love with Adrian.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Adrian in the Creed movies has passed away by that point.
Yeah.
But Rocky is still, like, he's visiting her every day and talking to her grave, and, like, he still has the genuine love for her that was part of what made their relationship so special in the original movie. Additionally, they didn't, he has a little bit of, like, weariness and tiredness, but he's still the same gentle heart that he was in the early movies.
Yes.
Now, we've talked about how Rocky is actually an example of non-toxic masculinity and supportive feminists, but still macho man.
Yeah.
And I think that continued, and I think he kind of, like, part of what he did was kind of help mold fault of the Rocky movies. Was that he's, the Italian stallion, but he's a gushy breadstick on the inside.
Yes.
So, anyways. All right, we're at 30 minutes, so we should wrap up this.
Yes, and let's then talk and get to the discussion that it kind of spawned all this, because when we'll take our customary break.
Would you like to stop and reboot your brain for a second?
We will take our break, and when we come back, we will talk about the continuation of the reboot that is
Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes.
Yes.
It's Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. That's what we're going to talk about. Okay, I've unplugged Brandon and plugged him back in.
Doom.
So hopefully we can continue on.
All right. So this might be a weird one for a date night, but this is like the one request I had during the craziness of the past month is going and seeing Planet of the Apes.
Right. But we kind of had to track it down.
Yeah,
at this point.
It had left a lot of the major theaters, but
I think it was in our small town theater for a week.
I think it was, yeah.
But okay, so the Planet of the Apes series.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm going to ask you some of the same questions I asked about the other ones. When did you come to the Planet of the Apes? Did you watch them as a kid?
I came to the Planet of the Apes in high school.
Okay.
Is when I actually watched the first one all the way through. Because up until then, of course, growing up in the 90s, you saw parodies of it everywhere.
Right.
The shock ending, one of the greatest endings in movie history, you'd already knew about.
Oh, right, yeah.
So...
it's like, at this point, knowing that, I see dead people.
Yeah, exactly. Or knowing that, Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's father.
Right.
It's like you it's been spoiled for you going in unless you were really, really good about it.
Unless you're Brendan Fraser living in a bunker underneath the mini mall because of the nuclear war.
So that's when I watched the first one, and then I watched a documentary on, believe it or not, American Movie Classics.
Okay.
Back when it was actually legitimate and earned that title.
AMC.
Yeah. Where they did a outstanding documentary on the making of the films, the entire film series, and that piqued my interest because I never knew there were sequels to the original.
Right.
And then I went and watched all of those and just kind of fell in love with them. I thought that they were phenomenal pictures.
So I will confess that I have never seen the originals other than like snatches here and there.
Yeah.
Okay. But I did watch The Rise of the Planet of the Apes when it came out. I watched that in the theater. I believe I caught Dawn of the Planet of the Apes at home, rented it at home.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think I watched the War for the Planet of the Apes at all. So I'm coming from a different point of view.
Yeah, and I was one, because, again, I've always been against reboots or reimaginings when I think that the originals were done perfectly. And the Tim Burton abomination left a bad taste in everybody's mouth.
Oh my gosh, I forgot about that.
Most people did, because it's awful.
When was that?
That was in the 90s. Or early 2000s.
Gary Oldman in that?
No, Mark Wahlberg was in that.
Ugh.
Mark Wahlberg, of course, Helena Bonham Carter, Paul Giamatti, Michael Clark Duncan, Tim Roth.
Tim Roth.
Yeah.
That's who I'm thinking of.
With the exception of really great makeup,
yeah,
there's nothing redeemable about that movie. It is just awful.
Right.
And so when I saw that they were doing another one a few years back, I was just like, oh my God, why are we doing this? But my curiosity was piqued, went and saw Rise of the Planet of the Apes. Like, that's how you fucking reboot something.
Even though it had James Franco in it.
Even though it had James Franco in it. But everything else, I was a mark for it ever since.
You know, I did really enjoy Rise of the Planet of the Apes. I just, like, I have no excuse for not watching the other ones. It just was life.
Yeah.
I had little kids. And, yeah. So, so you say you liked Rise, you liked Dawn.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't think War was as good.
It was so-so.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think it was as good as the first two, but it was all right. It was a good ending to what we thought was the trilogy at the time.
Right. So now you were saying you think this is the beginning of a new trilogy.
From what I've heard, and again, I have no sources to back this up. I think it's just, but yes, I think this is meant to be the start of another trilogy.
I would say from the ending that they were definitely setting up for another movie.
Yeah. So
I agree with you there.
This one, so most of you probably know this already. So this takes place about 300 or so years. They never say for sure. They say many generations.
So enough that the cities have been reclaimed by nature.
Yes. So Caesar is gone. The humans are scattered. Most of them have gone feral. And the apes basically rule the earth in their little segregated communities. You've got little tribes and clans and, you know, all of that. And we focus on a completely original ape character, one of the first ones we've had in years.
Right.
In Noah.
Yes. And Noah is the son of one of the elders of the Eagle clan, who are a clan that lives in the mountains. They train eagles.
Seems like their whole culture and society are kind of built around bonding with an eagle. And
their houses and living quarters are like eagle areas.
Mm-hmm.
They eat a lot of fish.
Yeah.
But you know, of course, all of the peacefulness is
erupted when his village is destroyed and his entire clan stolen by another group of apes,
led by gorillas mainly,
or gorillas in the being the military, led by, what was his name?
Proximus
Caesar.
Proximus Caesar, and they destroyed his village looking for a human.
Yes. But also because that's how Proximus, because he's following the roadmap of the Romans and is basically conquering and stealing people and basically making them part of his kingdom.
Right. Whether they want to be or not. Right.
So it's kind of a dual purpose.
Right. Which, are humans used as the slaves in the original series?
No, they were used as they were hunted and experimented on and things like that. So
so they bring in, like, they're herding the clan, so they're on his journey. So the only one who is not captured and survives is Noah.
Uh-huh.
And so he goes off on his hero's journey to find his clan
and rescue them,
bring them home. Mm-hmm. Along the way, he meets Raka,
an orangutan,
my favorite kind of monkey. I love their pretty faces. Who is a devotee of Caesar and is the last one.
Yes.
And he's like, his task is to try to preserve the knowledge of Caesar, because what it turns out Proximus has done is taken the words of Caesar and perverted them so that he was basically using them as his way of colonizing everybody.
And justifying his actions.
Right. Which, boy, does that sound familiar.
Mm-hmm.
So...
yeah, the perversion of religion, or you put it really well. You had when we were walking out, and you were saying it was the perversion of a deity who didn't want to be a deity.
Right.
You know, is a big one of the big thematic elements of this film.
Right. So lauding Caesar and like as this deity, and also turning his words like into completely opposite of their initial intentions.
Mm-hmm.
So Raka is trying to fight against that. Along the way they run into May, who is a human, who it turns out can talk,
mm-hmm.
and is like she is the one who they're after.
Yeah.
Because there's a vault, and Proximus wants the vault, and there's weapons, and of course yada yada yada. Okay.
Yeah.
So, give me your thoughts. Your basic leaving the theater thoughts.
My basic leaving the theater thoughts, and we talked about this, is it's very different than any previous Apes movie. In that, again, I do believe they are consciously setting up for at least 2 other movies.
Right.
And so therefore structurally it's different than a lot of the other Apes films, which always felt like they were one-offs. We're going to do this, and then if a sequel happened, okay, great.
It did feel like a lot of world building.
Yeah, so it felt like it had a much slower tone for the world building. You want to see the society they've built and how it functions, and the rituals and the holidays and the hierarchies that make it up. Whereas the original Planet of the Apes never worried about any of that shit, because they were just like, it's one movie, no one cares.
Right.
And the less that you explain how this world works, the more alien it feels to the audience.
But here they're talking about their ceremonies. It seems as though they have like rituals and markings for certain people.
Mm-hmm.
And
so I liked it. I liked it, but it did feel, just in terms of pacing, it was a little slower than some of the others.
Okay.
And a little bit more, again, it has that franchise feel of, we're building up to what's going to happen next time.
Right.
As opposed to kind of a self-contained story, which this is, but it definitely has the thing of, to be continued, ...
For sure. And what's interesting to me is that you have the humans and you have the apes. And, there's different... there's feral humans, there's intelligent humans, there's the, colonizer apes, there's the peaceful apes. But there's no statement in the movie about this is the right side and this is the wrong side.
But that again is very, very true to the Planet of the Apes themes, is that it's always a mixture. It's always there's gray.
Okay.
One thing could be wrong, but you could be doing the right thing for the wrong reasons and the wrong thing for the right reasons.
Okay.
That's a very Planet of the Apes type of story. Even when they have antagonists, and people who are supposed to be quote-unquote villains, you understand why they're doing what they're doing and why it's so important to them.
Right.
Which,
yeah, I can see that. But I do think that it is kind of, you sit back and you wonder, like, okay, do I feel like Noah is the hero of the story? Do I feel like May is the hero of the story? You can see the conflict too in Noah about who he should trust, what he should do, like what actions he should take as now the de facto leader of his tribe. So, it's a thinker, I feel like.
And again, that is a hallmark of a good Planet of the Apes movie, is you should leave questioning things and whatnot. That's how it should be.
Okay, so things that they did right.
I think they told an interesting story.
Okay.
And while it was a little slow, I kind of enjoyed seeing how the societies were built and what they kind of focused on. And I get the feeling, kind of like, you get a lot of these TV shows that have, fictional worlds. I have a feeling some sociologists or something had a great time coming up with all of this,
right? The
ape societies and how they would have evolved over however many generations.
Yeah.
I like Noah as a new leading character. I assume he's going to be kind of the central character going forward.
Unless they do another leap.
Yeah, that is true, which they could.
But I don't see that happening.
I like that there is, like you say, it is very much a coming of age hero's journey. Because his perspective is very much that of a young person coming into adulthood and realizing the world is not what the adults in your life or everything have told you.
And there's a world outside what you said.
Yeah, and there's kind of like people are doing now and have been doing for the last couple of years, kind of that reevaluation of what you've been taught,
right?
And what pieces of history have been left out.
Yes.
And trying to make sense of what to do with that knowledge.
Right. I think that the CGI and motion capture has progressed enough that it did not take me out of the movie.
No.
Which is kind of a big deal on the big screen.
Mm-hmm.
There were a few times when you could kind of see the facial expressions and they felt a little too human. But for the most part, it was a very realistic special effects presentation.
Yeah, it was.
I also kind of liked how the implication was that because of the way that the apes lived versus the humans before them, nature is thriving.
Yeah.
They never really come out and say that, but that's like what you see, like the greenery and the animals and the water rushing.
Well, consider this, and okay, real quick, to discuss this, I have to I'll mention some spoilers for the end, so if you don't want to know that, skip ahead a little bit. Kind of the visual language of that. You have, like you say, the Noah and his tribe, who, like you say, are in greenery and are in, very, lush surroundings. You have the human society, which we see in the vault, and
right.
Also in the end, their bunker or whatever.
Yeah.
All very mechanical, cold, very,
kind of decrepit, and even the building in the outside of the building is still very But
it's very sharp, very unnatural angles. It's all very oppressive, and then you have in the middle, you have Proximus in a burned out ship,
right?
Which is like a blend of the two.
Right, the burnout ship surrounded by the beach
and the ocean. So you have a very clear kind of visual style for each of the three societies.
Right.
And the one that with Proximus being the one that's kind of which way is he going to go?
Right, and it was interesting too that the choices that he makes that we would consider destructive and dangerous and colonizing are all things that he's learned from human history.
Mm-hmm.
And the embracing of the human history is where the destruction happens.
Well, I also think it sends a message that, again, kind of what you were talking about in the concept of you're not sure who to root for, is the idea that, in the first 3 films of this series, the apes were definitely supposed to be our heroes.
Right.
Humans were sympathetic to a point, but you wanted Caesar and his people to get through because you knew Caesar was the good guy.
Right.
But it goes to show that even something like a society that starts out being founded with the best of intentions and by a good and noble person or whatever, eventually there are going to come people who are going to manipulate that for their own ends. Not every member of a society is good and pure and wonderful.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay,
so let's talk about issues. Did you have any issues with it?
The main issue I had, and I think the ending kind of helped with this a little bit, and we talked a little bit about it, is May, our human character. Her manner of speaking felt much too modern.
It did.
Like, for someone who's... I don't know how I would have changed that, but there's a reason why a lot of people thought going in, from the trailers and everything, that she was going to be kind of a reboot of the Charlton Heston character.
Right, coming from space.
Yeah, an astronaut from the past arriving on the planet of the apes, and the way she spoke definitely
leaned into that.
So I don't know. That felt distracting, and I don't know how I would have fixed that, because if you go too far in the other direction, it sounds too fakey and sci-fi.
Right. Yeah. Although, spoiler alerts. Skip ahead 30 seconds if you don't want to know. If they had been living in bunkers like that since then, they would have educated themselves and had that same manner of talking.
And I think you're right. I think when we kind of see where she's been,
right,
and where she actually comes from, it does make a lot more sense.
Right. Okay, spoiler over.
Yeah.
So my issue, and we talked about this a little bit when we left the theater. For a franchise that is as much about social issues as it is, I feel like there's a definite lack of diversity in the cast. Most of the main characters are voiced by white actors or played by white actors, with the exception being I want to say his name is Marcus Kane, but I could be wrong. And he was the voice of Rocco. But my main issue with the lack of diversity is the idea that for the majority of the movie, the only 2 intelligent humans that are on the screen are both played by white actors. And even when they do like the feral human scene, a lot of those are white actors too. So I just feel like there would probably be more especially because this is like in the San Francisco area, right? Like there would be a lot more diversity in the humans, I feel like, than that. And if we're gonna have them all one color, it'd probably be more of a brown color, So yeah, I had a little bit of an issue with that. If you're gonna portray the only 2 intelligent humans, maybe don't make them both white people.
But now here's something I didn't think of when you first brought it up. But you notice how, yes, that is true, but the 2 humans, one of which was a spineless person who turned on his own kind, and the other is a person of questionable morals that you're not sure if you should trust.
Okay. That's valid. So, I don't know. It's something to think about. Like, I'm not saying they did wrong. I'm saying that it's a conversation that we have to have as we examine our own intuitive bias. You know? Anyways.
Okay.
So there was that. I think that I just personally have a hard time just with, so especially the first half of the movie, a lot of the ape language is very broken, not broken, slow and short, and my brain kind of gets tired of that a little bit. I just want them to talk faster. So that's just a personal thing. That's not an actual this is wrong and you need to fix it kind of situation. So yeah. Anyways.
All right.
But
I did think it was, but again, I think as the movie went on, I kind of felt a little better about it. But I agree with you, because like we said, in the first 3 of this series, there was a definite evolution of the ape language. At first, it was all sign language, and then in the second one, it was mostly sign language with a few words, kind of here and there. And then in the third one, it was mostly spoken.
Right.
So if this is supposed to be several generations later,
right,
you
would think it would have evolved.
Yeah, like the speech patterns would have, gotten stronger. But you notice that the Eagle clan, Noah's people, still used
a lot of
sign language, which means they probably they only speak when things don't have an equivalent sign that they've come up with. But
they also use a lot of singing to communicate.
Yeah, but whereas the kingdom didn't use any sign language.
Right.
The king barked orders.
Yeah.
So I think it might have been another thing they did to kind of differentiate the
society.
Yeah, the different colonies and whatnot.
Okay.
But I get where you're coming from. I'm not disagreeing. I'm just saying that might be why they did that.
Yeah. And like I said, it's not like I don't know that it's wrong. I just know that my brain is like, please talk faster, please. But that's just a personal thing.
Yeah.
And I know that's not what everybody's gonna think. So, okay. So coming at this from kind of a novice point of view, I feel like this movie is probably a good B+.
B+?
I think it's got good world building. I think it was entertaining. I would have done with more Raqqa. More Raqqa. But also maybe a little bit more humor. A lot of it just was taking itself so seriously.
Yeah.
And so I feel like if we could have a little bit more levity, that would be relieving, because there's just a lot of intensity.
Yeah.
So yeah. How about you?
You know what? I'm going to be honest, and I'm also going to go a B+.
Oh wow.
On this one. And I think the reason it does not get the full A from me is because, again, I think a Planet of the Apes film works best when it's a self-contained story.
Okay.
That has a beginning, middle, and end. It has its point to make.
Right.
And it makes that and then says, okay, we're done, and if another sequel comes along, okay, great, we'll figure that problem out when we get there.
Okay.
but we're living in a different era where sequels are planned and, you know, franchises have overarching stories. So it's a different take on it.
Right.
So maybe after the next one and the next one, maybe it'll all turn into a cohesive whole, kind of like the Tom Holland Spider-Man movies.
Okay.
But that all being said, I agree with what you've said. It was entertaining. It's a think piece. I like the new characters. And there's a lot of, and I am interested to see what they do with it next.
Right.
Which is a good thing. It's better than kind of going, oh God, please don't do another one of those.
Yeah.
So.
Although I do have to say, every time you have watched Creed, you've gone, they should just stop here. And I don't think that another one would be as good. And then they make another one and you're like, okay, that was great.
Well,
but they should just stop here.
Well, you want to know something? It's funny you bring that up. I said that about each of these new Planet of the Apes movies. Every single one. Rise of the Planet of the Apes was great, and I said, okay, we're good. Don't try to. They did Dawn, and I did, okay, I don't like the look. And then it was great, and I was like, all right, good, let's stop. Don't do it. And then, you know, so on and so on. So I like being proven wrong.
Okay.
You know, so. And since,
less so in marriage.
So, and since this time we know there's going to be more sequels.
Right.
I think it's like, okay, if we're planning ahead, let's make sure it's worth it. Let's make sure that whatever story you're telling or wherever this is going, let's make sure it's thought out and it's worth the journey.
Yeah.
So.
All right, honey. Well,
yeah.
We're almost home and I'm ready for bed.
Same here. So thank you so much for coming along with us. Again, thank you for a wonderful date night, my love.
Oh, yeah.
And we will try to get these out a little bit more regularly now that life has calmed down slightly.
Yeah, no promises.
I think we still got one more we got to do to get caught up. But thank you all. We're back. We hope to be back again. We will see you next time. And as always, drive safe. And we will see you at the movies.